I want to go back to Saturday and Coach Rhule talking because I had said some things a couple of weeks ago, and even a month ago, because I think it started with Brunts, and I asked you, I said, "Hey, who's the one player that you would use on the current roster as kind of the poster child for development?" And everybody had all these good ideas, and I said, I for me, I would take Dylan Raiola. And I kind of said some things about, you put the film study and the charisma and the natural leadership with like being in elite level shape, and the players see that, like there would be power in that. And I think some people thought I was saying that, that he didn't work hard or he wasn't this or he wasn't that. But that's not what I was saying. I was saying when you combine everything with him evolving and changing his body type and running the football, like that could do wonders for this team. Were you surprised that Coach Rhule was so specific with the next phase of his maturity and growth like he was at the end of that presser on Saturday?
No, it's almost like some things sometimes. I'll give you that, Damon.
It's not true at all. I felt like so full disclosure, that's fair. That's fair. Because it was eerie because Ravi goes, he sounded just like you. And I go, I didn't realize he said it at first. But over the last week, I was like, dang, was I out of pocket in how I explained that? Like because I knew it may not have landed well with people if you only heard bits and pieces.
Yeah, if you only heard the clip.
But if you heard me like in its entirety, like I think it was fine. That's just me.
No, you made a good point then, and he made a good point Saturday. I think when you look at the roster, he's the most talked about player, and if the most talked about player every day is showing up with that fuel to get better at these specific things and know they have a long way to go before they've arrived, everybody else I think feeds off that. And that felt like the point he was making Saturday. I'm guessing sort of what you were getting at when you said that.
Well, I mean, he was at the Supernovas game. He's in the Tominaga T-shirt. Yeah. He's in the Chiefs locker room. Like, at some point, your guys want to see you grimy, too.
Yeah, and I like that he separated that. He wasn't saying he wasn't doing the second part, but that's the thing. Like, the bonus of Dylan Raiola is that he does like to be part of the community, and he does like to represent Husker athletics and be at all the events. He's always like courtside for the basketball games, and I know he goes to a lot of other events as well. But I think Rhule made the good point. You got to make sure then you're there at 8 a.m. that Saturday morning, and you're front and center. And it wasn't a call out. He's saying that's what he's doing, but they all have to work together, and guys will follow that. And so his exact quote, I'm looking at it, I think when you see your best players, and Dylan is certainly one of our best players, when you see them paying the price every day, and then it trailed into another thought, but it's a big deal. And so he pointed out how last year with the wide receivers, maybe it was a deal where you got like five receivers there for a workout one day. How about getting all of them this year? Like, to set the bar higher than it was. And I think they thought he was a pretty good leader last season. But there's steps for him to go. And if he climbs that ladder, other guys are going to fall in line with that, I think.
I mean, just imagine if Dylan can scramble 3 or 4 times a game or slide and go into contact for a first down, given all the other attributes he has. I mean, that would be like magic. I don't think that's hyperbole, right?
No, it would be. And I think it would also help the passing game, too, when you have that threat. That sometimes both things play off each other well, but how often do games come down to, it's 3rd down and 6 and a QB on a busted or broken play or not as it's drawn up on the grease board goes and gets 10, and you move the chains and you continue and then you function more as you drew it up the rest of the way. So I think those plays will be critical. I think him being able to experience last year firsthand how necessary those plays are to winning, and I'm sure learning too from those cases where he took his share of tough critiques from people when he slid a yard short of the first down at USC, and then in the bowl game it ended up working out pretty well because it was like it was supposed to be because Ramir got his 1,000 yards on the nose on that next play. But those are the plays you expect a quarterback going into year 2 to learn from, and some of those mistakes get erased the next season.
Yeah, I mean, BC, it does kind of feel like we forget because he's been sort of ever present in our lives that, like, this guy was a true freshman last year.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's a lot of those things that theoretically, like, you have to put the work in, obviously, but theoretically a lot of those things improve just by no longer being a true freshman.
And he's got the double whammy too, BC, because he's the youngest and close to the best.
Yeah, and I would also say when to your first question, when we were talking about the second part about the work, that first part too, he handles incredibly well about just being Dylan Raiola in the state of Nebraska. I mean, not many people could do that as well as he does. Not many people who are my age in their 40s could function and not do silly things being in the spotlight like he is, and he always has a good way about him. I always see him down at PBA taking every picture when someone asks and sign autographs, and I think that stuff counts too. But the football part, it's just okay, we know he's dedicated and been dedicated to it since he could probably walk about learning the game, but it's that understanding that there's always there's more evolution you can have as a player, and understanding it, looking at the film with coaches, like this specific play, I could have done that differently. And I think he does have a mind, from what I've heard about him, that likes that. He's a football guy and he's a football grinder, and he's got to be that this offseason if Nebraska is going to be a great team, because he's going to be the straw that stirs the drink. And so hopefully he's setting that tone right now.
Yeah, BC, I sometimes think we get this idea in our head that being a hard worker is sort of a binary switch, right? Either you're the laziest person alive or you're Michael Jordan.
That's a good point.
Like a psychotic hard worker, right? And like there's a spectrum. And there's also, I brought this up a couple times, but it seems like he's an absolute just beast in the film room, like works incredibly hard at that part. But it's like, okay, are you working hard in that? Are you also working hard in like the weight room and your nutrition and your conditioning? And like, you could be a really good hard worker in one area and still need some improvement in other areas. And I think sometimes this narrative creeps up when somebody has any sort of suggestions for improvement that like, oh, he must not be a hard worker. It's like, no, there's levels to this though, right? Like the quote from The Last Dance where Roy Williams is talking to Michael Jordan, he goes, I'm working as hard as everybody else. And he's like, well, do you want to be like everybody else?
Yeah.
And so like I think sometimes we forget it's not either you are or you aren't. And a lot of times that progression goes along with regular maturity as well.
Yep. The greatest players don't ever think they work hard enough. I mean, there's always another level to it. And I thought you made a good point in your previous question, Ravi, just about we always have to remind too of him being a true freshman last year. And so whatever mistakes were made along the way as a player, it should have been expected in a lot of ways, like that there were going to be those road bumps. And I mean, just look at some of the young guys that have come through this program and tried to be a quarterback before. It's very difficult to get going, right away at that position. Like I like the guy they brought in out of the transfer portal, Marcos Davia. I like him a lot. He didn't play last year at Purdue. He was a guy who ripped it up down in the heart of Texas, down in Friday Night Lights country, all of his high school career, and won district titles and was a great player. And it took a year of him. He was on the sideline having to, learn things and kind of study the game from a distance without even playing and without having the benefit, without having to deal with being out there in the spotlight like Raiola did. So Dylan Raiola was in rare company, is the point to that, of just being front and center as a true freshman. There's a lot of guys who have been rated highly as recruits who do not play or take on the role that he did, or are under the microscope like he is, I think, even nationally. And I think some of that's because of the Mahomes comparisons and stuff like that. So people like to rib him when things don't go his way. But he seems to take that in stride, and I think that's good for him too. He got to deal with sort of their critiques that that come with being a public figure. And when you fail, like, how do you deal with that last year? And so now you work through that in your second season. All that can be beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, there's a really good example just in Nico Yamaleva from Tennessee, right? That guy was as highly touted as anyone coming out, didn't play all but a couple games as a true freshman, and at the very end, and then still sort of had a lot of the same struggles this year that Dylan Raiola had, right? Like there's even, I mean, Arch Manning is about as touted as anybody's ever been, and the guy still hasn't hardly played in 2 years, right? Like I think we forget how unique the situation was that Dylan was put in.
Yeah, we do forget it sometimes, and here's the benefit too. Like in December of, I guess it would have been 23, there was that week where we were talking about like, oh, what if like Kyle McCord, who obviously he had a pretty good year for himself, but what if he came here and Dylan waits behind the scenes? And we sort of saw that with Arch Manning. But now Nebraska has the benefit of the way it played out. You brought him in, he got that experience as a true freshman. And now I do think you will start to see the benefits of that in 25, that he didn't have to have that bridge season that I sometimes talk about as being so useful. It can be a help, but so can learning on the field and learning through your mistakes and everything that Dylan went through last season. And there was a lot of good stuff in there too. And I think, even though he had the one play where he slid down a yard short in the Pinstripe Bowl, on that same drive, there was a lot that went down. Like Nebraska was able to capitalize on finishing off a 4-minute drill, which they have not done really well in the past. And that's how they ended their season. There was a moment where he gets up and the late hit and guys come to his aid. And there was sort of that camaraderie moment between, with his teammates having his back against Boston College when things got feisty. So I think there was a lot of stuff, like even in the last 4 to 5 minutes of that bowl game in New York City, that was kind of a nice catapult into this season.
BC, it's interesting. Like I saw a stat my buddy sent me yesterday where 60% of the top 10 quarterbacks have transferred from between 21 and 23, which is staggering when we look at the pressure that we put on Dylan. The other thing was, and I thought it kind of flew under the radar when Coach Rhule answered the question about Dylan. Remember in the fall, Coach Rhule said, "Hey, this is big boy stuff. We're throwing it all at him. We're not babysitting this thing.
Yeah,
we're giving him the keys." Right? Then in the spring it was, "Hey, in order to really make this his offense, he has to do this, and then he went through the laundry list." I thought that was interesting that he showed us that he has evaluated, made an assessment, wasn't really, not all the way there with it. So this is the next phase. Like he told us that he had evaluated it on the fly and this was the next phase, even after what he said last year. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah, I do too. And I do think there's been good communication, it seems like, between QB and head coach, which matters a lot. I remember at points during this season, Rhule would say how Raiola would give him, like, I think it was a list of 3 things, like he wanted to do better that week or something like that. It was like pretty fresh, like right after a game, they would have that discussion point about something that specifically that the quarterback wanted to work at that week and improving. And I just think that's a good relationship. That's very useful as you go through the offseason. It's useful when you get to the grind of the season. It's useful during weird months like December when I'm sure people are trying to pull at your quarterback, that you have that sort of relationship. And I think that matters at the end of the day to loyalty and wanting to be in a particular program. So I was also struck by, in December, Dana Holgorsen, when he was asked about Dylan, just how impressed he was about how he knows answers that guys his age usually don't know when they're like in the film room. And I think we all agree that Dana Holgorsen is not someone who just says something to say something. So I when he says a compliment like that, we make a big deal, right?
They're hard. They are hard to come by for him. I would concur. He's tough.
I mean, when he says the receivers, when he first got here, like our perimeter blocking sucks, basically. We put that under the microscope and like, okay, this guy's blunt. So when a person is blunt like that and says sort of negative things that need to be fixed, when they say the positive, we also got, I think, shine a light on those. And so, I mean, his quote really stuck out to me. I've never been around a freshman quarterback that has those answers, is exactly what he said. He said he's been around freshmen that play at high level, but not to the point they understand some of the answers when, like, he's in the film room with Glenn Thomas and going through some of the specifics. So the brain and how he calculates things, like when they're watching it back, it's all there. And now it's like, okay, taking that next step when the lights are on, when it's that pass you got to make against Illinois, all that stuff, like this is what you're building for. But he's got the foundation. And I mean, he's got it way more than most people.
I'm hoping to be able to get to basketball, but I got to ask you one more thing. This is kind of yesterday was kind of my outward apology. I didn't necessarily say, like, will you forgive me? But I was joking with Ravi about how I walked in to pick Zoe up on, what's today? Monday. And her daycare provider or the child care person at school, it's 4:00, and she's an older lady, and we don't talk a ton, but the first thing that she said to me when I picked Zoe up was, please tell me we're going to have a spring game. What is going on with the red and white spring game? And it caught me off guard, BC. Like, I'm probably sure I staggered or stumbled or him-hawed through it or something. And I mumbled something, and I did something I never do. I actually went to go help my little girl get her stuff because it was letting me off the hook. So I came back to the show, and I'm like, to Robbie, and I said, I'm surprised that the spring game thing is a big deal. Like, it was the last thing that I paid attention to during the press conference because I trust that whatever they do in the meantime will be fine, right? And then we went in this back and forth, BC, but Ravi said something interesting where he said, I think we have to be careful here, though. Like, we don't want to be too dismissive of the people that butter your bread. I think there's a fine line between accommodating them and taking them for granted. So then I was like, oh, okay, well, all right, I see that perspective. Because at first I didn't, and I almost felt bad for not recognizing it.
Man, that's a good story, Damon, because I'm exactly that way about it sometimes, because I'll get people who will get all fired up about the spring game, and I'll quickly retort. It's like, well, they have other scrimmages behind closed doors that are way more important. Like that, I sort of go to that, like, well, and I do think I become a little bit hardened to, like, how great of an event it is that you are able to consistently draw 60,000 or whatever plus people, and it's a family event. It's an event where you can take your 5-year-old to the stadium, and it's a no stress deal too. Like, everybody loves game day when it counts, but there is something to be said for going into that stadium where you're not going to walk out angry. You're not going to leave after a loss. It's just going to be a good feeling day with your family where you're kind of a pretend game day. And so it is going to be tough. Like, I don't know what line you walk or how you make it something that's palatable to the fan base, while also protecting what you want to protect, which I think Matt Rhule makes a very good point. I think most of this fan base understands it, actually, that we are in a weird era where people are trying to poach stuff left and right, and you don't want to open up the door even a crack to allow people to do that after all the work you've put in to try to build this roster. So I don't know what they're going to come up with exactly, but comments like the one you got there and some of the ones I hear sometimes, it should be on their mind that there is a loyal fan base that has loved this event for generations, and so you're going to have to come up with something.
I was like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be dismissive.
Well, I just, I think there's a pretty easy answer, right, BC? You have the game, you just don't televise it. Like, doesn't everybody win then? Like, you get the fans that want to go. You might even get more fans because you have people that can't watch it on TV. And then you don't have the national people trying to poach your players. Like, isn't that a win? I don't
know if it's that easy with your media partner, but I'm sure.
Like, I'm sure they could work something out.
BTN wouldn't be like, oh, we're mad at you.
Because if they're like, oh, if you have a spring game, you have to have it on TV, but you can just cancel your spring game and we're not worried about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I just, it seems like a simple answer to me.
I mean, it's something they'll have to weigh. And I know that the injuries part are a concern, and they had a couple last year. But like I said, there's other scrimmages, and I think they're going to go pretty hard this spring. I don't think, some people got into this whole conversation about, well, the 105, is that going to change how you practice? You still got to go be good at football and be physical. And so I don't know exactly how they're going to navigate this. And I understand, too, I think we should give a little bit of grace period here and see what they come up with.
For sure.
Matt Rhule, for good reason, up until that press conference Saturday, has had his mind probably on basically everything else but that. Like as far as your roster, and you're trying to get the right coaching staff in place. And so I do have trust they're going to come up with something that's interesting to the fan base. You make a good point, Ravi, about what they could do, but it is a big deal to a lot of people. And I've been part of the crew that sometimes dismisses how significant it is, even though I grew up in this state. And so it's good to always remember that.
My mind's telling me no, but my body. No, I'm sorry. My bad.
No, that was good. Thank you.
Damn it. BC, I forget this whole live radio thing sometimes. All right, that's enough. Stop it. BC, real quick. You got to help me here. You're Mr. Rational. Why do I feel like every Nebraska basketball game is must win? Like, I feel like tonight is like, I think they have to win this game.
Oh, they definitely have to win tonight.
And it's like
they 100% have to win.
We said that 2 weeks ago, and it wasn't true. Like, is it true this time?
It's close to true. I mean,
Thank you.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize Ohio State would count as a quad one. I'd lost track of where they were.
We need them to get their act together, though.
Yeah, and I don't trust that. I don't trust
Me
that. But
neither.
tonight, yeah, I do think Nebraska went out west knowing that what you're saying, that mission, like, got to go get two. And there was probably a lot of people skeptical they could get done what they did Sunday. And, I just love their mindset throughout that game. We know their flaws as a team. We've been over those on the radio the last few weeks, but guys maximized their niche. They did well for the most part. Now, I think tonight, and they're going to need this in these games going forward, Essegian's got to hit a couple more shots. I don't know that you can survive, going 4-23 from behind the arc. I know that's not this team's forte, but you got to hit a few more of those open looks. But if they can bring that same defensive energy and attack the glass like they did on Sunday, I think they'll win tonight. But it is a big game because you don't want – and I like that Hoiberg right away on the postgame. He said, big win. We can't go lose Wednesday. It throws away what we just got. So I think that's their mindset, and that's the way you got to be.
That's Brian Christopherson, Husker247. BC, we appreciate it. As always, we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, I always enjoy being on, guys. Thank you.